The Retro Football League presents The Extra Point. Powered by Wolverine Studios Draft Day Sports Pro Football. It's time to take the field. What are you bringing to the table? And now, for our host, Lance McAllister.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Extra Point, the only sports show dedicated to the Retro Football League. I'm your host, Lance McAllister, and we have an exciting episode lined up for you today. In Week 5 of the RFL, we witnessed some thrilling matchups that had fans on the edge of their seats. From last-minute touchdowns to record-breaking performances, it was a week filled with football excitement. So, sit back, relax, and let's dive into the action-packed games that unfolded in Week 5 of the RFL. Game 1 of Week 5 saw the Atlanta Falcons take on the Washington Redskins. The game was played in Atlanta, with a temperature of 74 degrees Fahrenheit, 13 miles per hour winds and rain. The Falcons, led by quarterback Ron Jaworski, had a strong offensive performance, scoring 20 points. Jaworski completed 9 out of 17 passes for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. Running back Delvin Williams had an outstanding game, rushing for 160 yards on 28 carries, with an average of 5.7 yards per carry. He also had 1 reception for 7 yards. Williams was named the offensive player of the game for his impressive performance. The Falcons' defense also played well, with linebacker Fulton Kuykendall leading the team with 5 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. However, the Redskins struggled to find their rhythm on offense. Quarterback Joe Theismann completed 13 out of 19 passes for 88 yards, but the team only managed to score 10 points. Running back Calvin Hill rushed for 57 yards on 24 carries, with an average of 2.4 yards per carry. Lamar Parrish was the standout player on defense for the Redskins, recording 16 tackles and 6 tackles for loss. Despite their efforts, the Falcons secured a 20-10 victory over the Redskins. In an exciting clash between the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings, the Lions emerged victorious with a final score of 28-19. The Lions' offense got off to a strong start, scoring 7 points in the first quarter and maintaining their momentum throughout the game. Quarterback Gary Danielson showcased his skills, completing 13 out of 20 passes for 175 yards and contributing 3 touchdowns. Running back Dexter Bussey also had an impressive performance, rushing for 126 yards on 25 carries, including a touchdown. The Lions' defense was led by linebacker Willie Hall, who recorded 13 tackles, including 1 tackle for loss. On the other side, the Vikings put up a tough fight but fell short in the end. Quarterback Fran Tarkenton displayed his versatility, completing 12 out of 24 passes for 161 yards and rushing for 119 yards on 8 carries, scoring 2 touchdowns. Running back Chuck Foreman also had a solid game, rushing for 110 yards on 16 carries with an average of 6.9 yards per carry. However, despite their efforts, the Vikings couldn't overcome the Lions' strong performance. Defensive end Mike Bell stood out for the Lions' defense, recording 1 tackle and 1 sack. With this victory, the Lions showcased their offensive prowess and solid defense, setting the stage for an exciting season ahead. In Game 3 of Week 5, the New York Jets faced off against the Miami Dolphins. The Jets emerged victorious with a final score of 17-10. The Jets started off slow, failing to score in the first 2 quarters. However, they managed to put up 17 points in the second half to secure the win. Phil Simms led the Jets' offense with 79 passing yards and a touchdown. Haskell Stanback was a standout performer in the rushing game, tallying 82 yards on 13 carries with an impressive average of 6.3 yards per carry. Defensively, Greg Buttle was a force to be reckoned with, recording 14 tackles, a tackle for loss, a sack, and a forced fumble. He was named the defensive player of the game. The Jets' victory was bolstered by their strong defensive performance and efficient rushing attack. On the other side of the field, the Miami Dolphins put up a valiant effort but fell short. Don Strock had a decent performance, completing 14 out of 22 passes for 123 yards. Benny Malone carried the ball 28 times for 56 yards, averaging 2 yards per carry. Steve Towle led the Dolphins' defense with 7 tackles. Despite their efforts, the Dolphins couldn't overcome the Jets' strong defensive play and efficient rushing attack. Steve Jones was named the offensive player of the game for his contribution of 73 rushing yards and 2 catches for 25 yards. Ultimately, the Jets' well-rounded performance led them to victory in this intense matchup. In Game 4 of Week 5, the New Orleans Saints hosted the New York Giants. The Saints came out strong, dominating the game and securing a convincing victory with a final score of 27-7. Led by quarterback Archie Manning, the Saints offense was firing on all cylinders. Manning had an impressive performance, completing 18 out of 22 passes for 190 yards and throwing 3 touchdowns. Running back Chuck Muncie played a key role as well, rushing for 71 yards on 18 carries and adding 2 receptions for 8 yards. The Saints' defense was equally impressive, with linebacker Phil Villapiano recording 10 tackles to lead the team. On the other side of the field, the Giants struggled to find their rhythm. Quarterback Burt Jones completed 18 out of 27 passes for 134 yards but failed to lead his team to any significant scoring opportunities. Running back Lydell Mitchell provided a bright spot for the Giants, rushing for 70 yards on 10 carries and scoring their lone touchdown. Linebacker Jim Leckler was the standout defender for the Giants, recording 12 tackles, including 3 tackles for loss. Overall, it was a dominant performance by the New Orleans Saints, with both their offense and defense shining throughout the game. Quarterback Archie Manning was awarded the Offensive Player of the Game for his stellar passing performance, while defensive end Ed Too Tall Jones was named the Defensive Player of the Game for his impactful plays, including 4 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. In a thrilling Game 5 matchup, the Philadelphia Eagles hosted the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Eagles emerged victorious with a final score of 31-13. The Eagles' offense was firing on all cylinders as quarterback Joe Ferguson completed 14 out of 21 passes for 159 yards and 1 touchdown. Running back Gary Davis had an outstanding performance, rushing for 75 yards on 20 carries, including a touchdown. He averaged 3.8 yards per carry, proving to be a key player for the Eagles' offense. Defensively, linebacker Frank Lemaster was a standout player for the Eagles. He recorded 7 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 sack, and forced 1 fumble. His stellar performance contributed to the Eagles' victory. On the other side, the Steelers' offense struggled to find their rhythm. Quarterback Terry Bradshaw completed 11 out of 17 passes for 225 yards and 2 touchdowns. However, it wasn't enough to overcome the strong defensive effort by the Eagles. The Eagles' victory was well-deserved, with their offense accumulating a total of 304 yards, including 145 rushing yards. Their defense held the Steelers to just 295 total yards, with only 70 rushing yards. With their impressive performance, running back Gary Davis was named the Offensive Player of the Game, while linebacker Frank Lemaster was recognized as the Defensive Player of the Game. The Eagles' win in Game 5 sets a positive tone for the rest of their season. In a thrilling Game 6 of Week 5, the Baltimore Colts took on the Buffalo Bills. The Colts, playing at home, put up a valiant effort but ultimately fell short, losing to the Bills by a score of 27-41. The Bills dominated the game, especially in the third quarter where they scored 21 points to break away from the Colts. Glenn Carano led the charge for the Bills, throwing for 298 yards and 4 touchdowns. Tony Nathan also had an impressive game, rushing for 143 yards and scoring a touchdown. On the defensive side, linebacker Jerry Robinson stood out, making 10 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and forcing 2 fumbles, earning him the title of Defensive Player of the Game. Despite the loss, the Colts had some standout performances as well. Quarterback Steve DeBerg had a solid game, completing 15 out of 20 passes for 214 yards. Franco Harris had a strong showing on the ground, rushing for 159 yards and scoring 2 touchdowns. However, it wasn't enough to overcome the relentless offense of the Bills. The Colts will need to regroup and make adjustments for their next game as they aim to bounce back from this defeat. In Game 7 of the 1979 football season, the Chicago Bears faced off against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Bears dominated the game, defeating the Buccaneers with a final score of 24-0. The Bears started strong with a touchdown in the third quarter and continued to build on their lead with 2 more touchdowns in the fourth quarter. Quarterback Jim Hart had an impressive performance, completing 12 out of 14 passes for 238 yards and 3 touchdowns. Terry Metcalf led the rushing game for the Bears, with 17 carries for 73 yards. Wayman Bryant stood out on defense, making 9 tackles with 5 tackles for loss. On the other side, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers struggled to find their footing in the game. Quarterback Danny White completed 14 out of 24 passes for 152 yards but was unable to lead his team to score any points. Charlie Davis led the rushing game for the Buccaneers with 23 carries for 45 yards and a 2-yard average. Dewey Selman had a notable performance on defense, making 12 tackles with 1 sack. Despite their efforts, the Buccaneers were unable to overcome the dominant performance of the Bears. The Offensive Player of the Game was awarded to wide receiver James Scott, who had an outstanding game with 4 catches for 140 yards and 1 touchdown. However, no defensive player of the game was named. With this victory, the Chicago Bears showcased their strength and secured an impressive win over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Game 7 of Week 5. The Houston Oilers hosted the Cleveland Browns in their 8th game of the season. The Oilers dominated the game, securing a 20-3 victory. Quarterback Dan Pastorini led the offense with 251 passing yards, while running back Don Hardman showcased his skills with 109 rushing yards and a touchdown. Hardman was named the Offensive Player of the game for his outstanding performance. Linebacker Charles Jackson stood out on defense, recording 8 tackles and 2 sacks, earning him the title of Defensive Player of the game. The Oilers' strong defensive effort held the Browns to only 204 total yards and limited their offense to just a field goal. On the other side, Browns quarterback Brian Sipe struggled to find his rhythm, completing 22 of 30 passes for 168 yards. Running back Greg Pruitt had a tough outing, only managing 20 rushing yards on 17 carries. The Browns' offense was unable to find the end zone and was held to a single field goal. Despite a solid defensive effort from linebacker Bob Babich, who recorded 8 tackles and 2 tackles for loss, the Browns could not contain the Oilers' offense. Overall, the game showcased the Oilers' dominance and highlighted the performances of Hardman and Jackson, ultimately resulting in a convincing victory for Houston. In an intense matchup between the Dallas Cowboys and the Cincinnati Bengals, the Cowboys emerged victorious with a final score of 24-20. The Cowboys took an early lead in the first quarter, scoring 7 points while the Bengals failed to put any points on the board. Both teams battled fiercely in the second and third quarters, with the Cowboys maintaining a slim lead throughout. In the fourth quarter, the Bengals managed to close the gap, but the Cowboys held on to secure the win. Warren Moon led the Cowboys' offense, delivering a solid performance with 154 passing yards and 1 touchdown. Tony Dorsett made a significant impact in the running game, rushing for 96 yards and 1 touchdown, while also contributing 68 yards receiving. Kurt Allerman stood out on the defensive end with 7 tackles and 1 forced fumble for the Cowboys. On the other side, Cliff Stutt led the Bengals' offense with 59 passing yards. Charlie Young had an impressive game in the rushing game, accumulating 161 yards and 1 touchdown, despite losing 1 fumble. Donnie Shell was a standout on defense for the Bengals, recording 11 tackles. Overall, it was a hard-fought contest, but the Cowboys' strong offensive performance and solid defense proved to be the difference, securing their victory over the Bengals. In Game 10 of Week 5, the Los Angeles Rams defeated the St. Louis Cardinals with a final score of 28-13. The Rams' offense was led by quarterback Mike Barilla, who completed 11 out of 12 passes for 117 yards. Running back Earl Campbell had an outstanding performance, rushing for 92 yards on 13 carries, including 2 touchdowns. Isaiah Robertson stood out on defense, recording 9 tackles, including 2 tackles for loss. On the other side, the Cardinals' offense struggled to find their rhythm. Quarterback Joe Montana completed 14 out of 23 passes for 99 yards, but was unable to lead his team to victory. Running back Walter Payton had a solid game, rushing for 111 yards on 20 carries, with an average of 5.6 yards per carry. He also contributed with 4 catches for 26 yards. Lucius Sanford was a standout on defense for the Cardinals, recording 16 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 1 sack, and forcing 2 fumbles. Overall, the Rams' strong offensive performance, combined with a solid defensive effort, proved to be too much for the Cardinals to handle. The Rams secured an important victory in Game 10 of the season, moving them closer to their playoff aspirations. In Game 11 of Week 5, the Oakland Raiders faced off against the Denver Broncos in a thrilling matchup. The Raiders emerged victorious with a final score of 13-10. The game started off slowly, with no points scored in the first quarter by either team. However, the Raiders picked up the pace in the second quarter, putting up 10 points to take the lead. The Broncos managed to score a field goal in the third quarter, narrowing the gap. As the fourth quarter began, both teams fought hard, but it was the Raiders who came out on top, adding a field goal to their score. Despite a late touchdown by the Broncos, the Raiders held on for the win. Ken Stabler led the Raiders' offense, completing 16 out of 22 passes for 141 yards. Robert Miller had a solid performance in rushing, with 17 carries for 71 yards. Brian Kelly stood out on defense for the Raiders, recording 12 tackles, including 1 tackle for loss. On the other side, the Denver Broncos put up a tough fight. Norm Snead played well at quarterback, completing 17 out of 20 passes for 178 yards and throwing 1 touchdown. John Keyworth carried the ball 29 times for 54 yards but unfortunately fumbled once. He also contributed with 3 receptions for 20 yards. Larry Evans was a standout on defense for the Broncos, recording 9 tackles, including 1 tackle for loss, and 1 sack. However, it was defensive tackle Otis Sistrunk of the Raiders who was named the Defensive Player of the Game. Sistrunk made a significant impact with 6 tackles, including 3 tackles for loss and 1 sack. With this victory, the Raiders improved their overall record, solidifying their position as a strong contender in the 1979 season. In a thrilling matchup, the Seattle Seahawks hosted the Kansas City Chiefs in Game 12 of the season. The Seahawks came out strong in the first quarter, with a touchdown from quarterback Jim Zorn. They continued their dominance in the second quarter, scoring 2 more touchdowns to take a commanding lead. The Chiefs managed to put up a field goal in the first quarter and a touchdown in the third quarter, but it wasn't enough to overcome the Seahawks' strong offensive performance. The final score was 24-10 in favor of the Seahawks. A standout player for the Seahawks was running back Sherman Smith, who had an impressive game. He rushed for 77 yards on 24 carries, averaging 3.2 yards per carry, and scored 3 touchdowns. Smith also contributed in the passing game, making 2 catches for 16 yards. Linebacker Mike Curtis was a force on the defensive end, recording 11 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and 1 interception. Their outstanding performances earned them the Offensive Player of the Game and Defensive Player of the Game honors, respectively. Despite the loss, the Chiefs had strong individual performances as well. Quarterback Ken Anderson completed 19 of 24 passes for 135 yards. Running back O.J. Simpson rushed for 62 yards on 17 carries, averaging 3.6 yards per carry, and scored a touchdown. Linebacker Barry Krause led the Chiefs' defense with 10 tackles and 3 tackles for loss. Overall, it was an exciting game between the Seahawks and Chiefs, with the Seahawks emerging victorious. The Seahawks offense, led by Jim Zorn and Sherman Smith, was too much for the Chiefs to handle. The Seahawks defense, anchored by Mike Curtis, made key plays to secure the win. The Seahawks look to carry this momentum into their next game as they continue their quest for a successful season. In Game 13 of Week 5, the San Diego Chargers faced off against the San Francisco 49ers. The Chargers came out on top with a final score of 22-20. The game was a closely contested battle with both teams showcasing their offensive prowess. The Chargers' offense was led by quarterback Dan Fouts, who threw for 194 yards and 2 touchdowns. Running back Ron Springs had an outstanding performance, rushing for 128 yards on 28 carries, with an average of 4.6 yards per carry. He also contributed with 2 catches for 11 yards. Springs was named the Offensive Player of the Game for his stellar display. On the defensive side, linebacker Jack Ham stood out with 10 tackles, earning him the title of Defensive Player of the Game. The 49ers put up a strong fight, with quarterback Roger Staubach throwing for 251 yards and 3 touchdowns. Running back Otis Anderson had a solid game as well, rushing for 85 yards on 20 carries, averaging 4.3 yards per carry. Despite their efforts, they fell just short of victory. Overall, it was an exciting and closely contested game between the Chargers and the 49ers, with the Chargers ultimately emerging victorious thanks to the standout performances of Ron Springs on offense and Jack Ham on defense. In Game 14 of Week 5, the Green Bay Packers went head-to-head against the New England Patriots. The Patriots dominated the game, defeating the Packers with a final score of 23-0. The Patriots' offense was led by quarterback Steve Grogan, who had an impressive passing performance, completing 13 out of 21 passes for 201 yards. Running back Andy Johnson showcased his skills, rushing for 116 yards with an average of 4.3 yards per carry and scoring 2 touchdowns. Johnson's outstanding performance earned him the title of Offensive Player of the Game. On the defensive side, linebacker Mike Douglas stood out with 11 tackles, including 5 tackles for loss and 1 sack. Douglas's exceptional play earned him the title of Defensive Player of the Game. Despite the Packers' efforts, their offense struggled to gain traction throughout the game. Quarterback Steve Fuller completed 14 out of 21 passes for 127 yards, but the team failed to put any points on the board. Running back Mike Strawn had a solid performance, rushing for 97 yards on 20 carries, averaging 4.9 yards per carry. However, it was not enough to overcome the Patriots' strong defense. The Packers' leading tackler was Mike Fuller, who recorded 7 tackles. Overall, the Patriots' dominant performance on both offense and defense secured their victory in this game. And that's a wrap for this week's episode of The Extra Point. We hope you enjoyed our coverage of the Retro Football League and the exciting games from Week 3. From thrilling comebacks to standout performances by players, it's been a fantastic week of football. Join us next week as we dive into the highlights and analysis of Week 6. Until then, stay tuned and keep cheering for your favorite RFL teams. Remember, it's all about the extra point.